The epigram for my talk this morning comes from that noted Brooklyn-born pedagogical philosopher and longtime coach of a champion Boston Celtics basketball team, the recently departed Red Auerbach. "It's not what we tell them," Red often said, "it's what they hear." I'll try this morning to transfer this bit of Auerbachian wisdom from the National Basketball Association locker room to the museum gallery. Slavery in New York was the most successful public exhibition in the 201-year-long history of the New York Historical Society. It opened in October 2005 and ran for 4.5 months, attracting an audience of 175,000 visitors, including 75,000 children, 45,000 of those in school groups. More than 5,000 school teachers participated in curriculum workshops and received a splendid kit of educational materials. The exhibit occasioned dozens of newspaper articles in New York, but also in Los Angeles, Boston, Washington, Miami, Chicago, and in London, Paris, and Rome. The Historical Society was keenly aware of the controversies that had swirled around previous exhibitions relating to slavery, like John Blanch's at the Library of Congress. And we had prepared for it to the extent even of bringing in a psychologist to explore with our security and visitor services staff how to deal with possible emotional crises that might occur in the gallery. But no controversy arose, none. Indeed, some African American visitors registered strong negative reactions in our comment book, but their negativism seemed to focus on the continuing injustice confronted by blacks in the United States, and not on the exhibit's interpretation of that history. And further, not a single person complained, at least to us, that the subject was unworthy of the Historical Society's attention. As David was talking before about the kind of resistance that occurs, we should, a phrase that we've heard so often, why can't we put all this painful history behind us? So that's just a real puzzle as to why we didn't encounter any of that kind of resistance or any real, why the exhibit didn't generate that kind of controversy. Occupying 9,000 square feet of the Society's first floor, the exhibition traced the experience of black New Yorkers from the roots of the settlement of New Amsterdam and the creation of a transatlantic economy of plantation agriculture, maritime commerce, and enslaved labor. I think that's a critical issue. We talked a little bit about confronting. Shorto's book had come out the year before and really neglected the importance of slavery and the importance, in fact, of the global economy to the creation of New Amsterdam. And this, of course, countered a very common myth in American schools about the pioneers, settlers. I think a considerable many people greeted that as a radical step. Traced that history through what we call the tightening vise of slavery in British New York, through the chaos and the opportunities for freedom offered to blacks by the American Revolution, and into the first opportunities for people of color to establish their own community institutions in the first quarter of the 19th century until New York State completed its emancipation in 1827. The exhibition displayed and interpreted dozens of original documents. It's as though, my colleague Louise Mears here and Kathleen Hulser, it's as though looking at our collection had been built over these 200 years is all in anticipation of having this exhibit. The collection itself, the Historical Society, was enormously rich in documentation of the history of slavery. Dozens of original documents, images, and artifacts. We deployed a wide variety of hands-on and multimedia interpretive programs, and it was accompanied by a full schedule of lectures, book talks, concerts, walking tours, a website, and educational programs. I hope one day I have the time to describe in detail how the interpretive curator / historian like me synthesizes those kinds of tools and the conceptual frameworks and information that we derive from many disciplines. Putting together an exhibit for me is experience of understanding, learning from literature in terms of narrative and characterization, the arc of a story, pedagogical theory, how constructivist learning occurs in galleries, how visitors make their own meaning, as Elizabeth was saying yesterday, aesthetics, environmental psychology and geography, media technologies, performance studies, and of course history. We use all of those kinds of disciplines to fashion the visitor's pathway through a story like this one. But all of these tools, whether they're the box of tools that are the physical cases and media devices, or the conceptual tools that we use, or what we could call inputs, or what Red Auerbach classed as what we tell them. I'm more interested this morning in the other side of Coach Auerbach's dictum, what they heard. How can we measure the visitor's experience of an exhibit like Slavery in New York? What did the visitors hear? What did they learn? What sense did they make of the material presented? For almost all of my 4-decade career in historical museum interpretation, it's shocking to say that, January 27th, it'll be 40 years, I've often been frustrated by the apparent muteness of visitors to exhibitions. I feel like a teacher, and I can't stand the fact that I never hear back enough from my students. Classroom teachers can observe how students evidence their mastery, and they can use exams and term papers to measure student response. We as museum educators, by contrast, we sit dolefully, we watch dolefully as our visitors descend the long flight of stairs from the Olympian heights of the museum gallery, repaying our efforts with wordlessness. But of course, actually, visitors are not mute or wordless. In fact, museum theorists now speak often about, quote, learning conversations in museums. We acknowledge that visitors come almost always in groups. Only 8% in a recent survey come solo to a museum, 8% of the visitors. And visitors connect with their companions continually through their visit. In fact, you could really say that the visit is a kind of conversation that's going on that's interrupted periodically by attention to the exhibit. And that's a very basic way of reframing our understanding of what our business actually is. So we have designed, in general, we've come to understand that what we're designing are these 3 or 4 minute engagements where we can bring people to a kind of focus and then let them go. This is not the way film works. It's not the way reading works. This is the special joy and the special burden of the medium of the exhibit. So our problem is how to listen in on these conversations, how to hear what they heard. Several years ago, American History Workshop developed a device called the Telling Lives program to do just that. Telling Lives creates video recordings of visitor responses and narratives through an integrated camera and computer system, fully automated and without requiring a staff interlocutor. And we've tested this program all around the United States and Canada. At Slavery in New York, more than 6,000 visitors devoted as much as 10 minutes each to telling us what they heard, what sense they could make of the story they had encountered. These 1,000 hours of interviews are surely among the richest archives we have for understanding how Americans, and most particularly African Americans, view the public interpretation of slavery in Black history. So I wanted to let you sample two of these snippets. These are just 2 out of the 6,000. They're just 2 brief. The whole thing is 3 minutes out of the total amount. So to the well, he means 5-minute video portrayal. I don't know how many of you saw the show, but in the show we had an exhibit element in which visitors could sit around in a circle and peer into a well and see a video projected of 4 Black women, African women, discussing their concerns. So that's what this is about. I just
It represents the Western world's exploitation of other human beings and the fact that so little was known prior to this exhibit is an impression, gives me a feeling about just hiding the necessary information from everyone and letting everyone talk about liberty and freedom when in fact in our midst was exploitation, enslavement. I think the exhibition was centered on getting people to know facts and bits of information, but not to feel what it was like and what the contradiction involved. I found the well and the reality of how information was passed from one to another and how the dominant groups made a point of making it difficult for blacks and for enslaved people to communicate with one another. And I see some of this continuing even today in the fact that so often if a group of black people are standing around talking, white people will come up and barge into the conversation and ask, quote, what's going on? Just so undignified and utterly ridiculous. But I can see its roots going back to the fact that you didn't really want us to have a private world, a world that we could talk about and talk about the open. But it struck me at that well sequence with the women only able to talk as long as they kept working. That really says something about life, and it hasn't changed that much if you really will look.
This is an amazing exhibit, one that I just sent an email as walking through it to a colleague of mine in Baltimore, where we're trying to tell a similar story. I've been inviting my friends to come and see it with black and white New Yorkers walking through it. It tells a hidden story that should long ago stop being hidden, because in seeing it and understanding it, and having developed a sense of empathy, maybe we'll be able to get better with the old times and the inequities that we continue to face in our differences every day.
Generating some conversation. I'm going to reserve or leave out my comments, my reading of these responses, and there, perhaps during the question period, you have some reactions to those. I want to say, no sense of these. I don't want to describe these as typical, because I don't actually like that expression or that characterization. But what both of these show to me, as I go through this, and as I go through as many, I've now watched about 500 or 600 of the 6,000. It just shows me how much we have underestimated the complexity of our visitors' understanding and of their artistry and of their intelligence, their ability to reframe the stories, to remake this history in terms of some kind of personal, moral, intellectual, social narrative, places themselves in a different place, puts them in a different framework. Visitors, as you watch these things, visitors are clearly unbound by the constraints that professional historians impose on themselves to stick to the facts. There's no clear boundary here between memory and history. It's not purely memory. It's not, and it is an effort in a sense to make historical sense. There's been a lot of talk at this meeting about the importance of place. And there's something very important about the place of the New York Historical Society in both of these stories, because it's in the sense that the lack of and this is a mainstream institution, and the perception of that, and perception of this old line, somewhat old-fashioned historical society could be the site for such a conversation is, I think, a very important part of it. So sometimes when we talk about the importance of place, it's not simply the overtones of specific historic places. All of this review of these stories has led me to focus on the emerging role of the History Museum In my career, over the course of my career, I've seen history museums move from pretty much mindless celebratory embodiments of contemporary prejudices on one area of American history or another. But we've lived through Vietnam and the civil rights movement and the emergence of institutions that have interpreted those, and of course the Holocaust museums and now museums of slavery. And I've spent much of my career working in those kinds of more problematic institutions. So I think what we're seeing now is this role of the museum as a kind of convener. The word I like best is a word that was coined about 20 years ago by my friend Jack Chen, who was the founder of the Chinatown History Project in Lower Manhattan. He used the phrase dialogic museum to represent his project's goal of sponsoring a conversation about the past with the community as a full-fledged participant. Museums are really not the best instruments for transferring historical knowledge or equipping visitors with complex historical concepts. One of the scholars on our upcoming exhibit scrawled in the margin of his, I sent him all the text as I did to Lois and Jim Horton and to David Blight, who are very, very valued scholarly advisors. And one of the other scholars scrawled in the text, "Do you think that our visitors are going to really have a comprehensive understanding of the causes of the Civil War after they go through this exhibit?" And I thought, what world is he in? This is 45 minutes of somebody's life. But museums can generate very powerful reframings, very powerful personal and interpersonal dialogue about history and its contemporary repercussions. So in conclusion, I want to say that Brett Auerbach was wrong. It isn't either what we tell them or what they hear, but how they play the game. That's history.